Okay, so if you've been watching this channel, I've made it pretty apparent that I don't think the Chargers should trade down. But in my final mock draft of the year, I'm exploring a trade down scenario. That involves getting some offensive line help. I don't love the idea, but maybe I'll get back to this guy who said he unsubscribed during my last mock draft. Speaking of which, I'm 76 subscribers away from 1,000, which is not as good as 69 away, but still I'll take it. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, I'd definitely appreciate it because then it'll mean I'll be able to afford pizza every now and then. So not much has changed since the last mock draft in terms of what the Chargers' needs are. Sure, they've added J.K. Dobbins and Christian Fulton, but these aren't landmark signings. Fulton could be a diamond in the rough, but that's pretty unlikely. And Dobbins, unfortunately, he's coming off an Achilles, and he also had an ACL injury, plus he had a lot of mileage in college, so there's not much you can expect from him. And as far as receiver goes, they've sniffed around Marcus Valdes-Scantling and DJ Chark, but again, neither of those really move the needle draft-wise. So going into the mock draft, wide receiver is still the biggest need. And spoiler alert, I don't take one with the first pick. However, I'm still pretty happy with who I end up getting. But at the same time, I'm not sure if things will play out the same way in reality. Meaning, I think there's a lot less risk taking one of the top receivers. But anyways, let's get into the picks. So I'm sitting there at number 5, and J.J. McCarthy's still on the board, whereas the other 3 quarterbacks are gone. Also, Malik Neighbors goes to the Cardinals, meaning Marvin Harrison's on the board. But since the Vikings are willing to give up an extra first-round pick in this year's draft, I guess that's worth giving up a receiver like that. Maybe. So all told, the Chargers get the Vikings' 11th pick, 23rd, and their 4th rounder that's 129th. So with their first pick at 11, I have the Chargers taking Taliese Fuaga. Everyone is dead set on him being able to just switch into right guard no problem in the pros, and I guess I have to believe them. I consider taking Amarius Mims here because I think he's got more upside, and his inexperience would probably make it easy for him to transition to right tackle and eventually replace Trey Pipkins. But I think the reason why Harbaugh and Roman seem to be adamant about getting a right guard, because it's pretty obvious they want an impactful run game right out of the gate. So if they do trade out, I think Fuaga is the guy who makes sense. With the Chargers' next first-round pick, I have them going O-line again, with Jackson Powers-Johnson. Obviously, I would have liked to go wide receiver, but with the way things are shaking out this year, all the top guys are going to be gone by 23, and that includes Brian Thomas. Also, I don't love the corners that are available, and a part of me would have preferred to take a guy like Quinyon Mitchell at 11. But the point of this mock draft is to see what would happen if they take some offensive linemen high. And I gotta say, pairing Johnson with Fuaga sounds like a pretty deadly combination. PFF did give me a D+ for this one, but I think it's because for some reason they haven't listed center as a need, even though Corey Linsley is retiring, but still. And if I'm being honest, Johnny Newton was on the board, and they could use defensive tackle, but I just feel like Jackson Powers-Johnson just seems like an all-pro waiting to happen. With their second round pick, I have the Chargers finally getting a receiver in Roman Wilson. As I alluded earlier, I'm very happy with this Roman Wilson pick. I personally think he's the 5th best receiver in this draft, behind Brian Thomas. Obviously, size-wise, it isn't amazing, but his speed is solid, and I like watching him play. I think he makes life easier for a quarterback, and I can see him working well with Herbert. I think Herbert sneakily likes throwing to the smaller guys. Like we saw this when he had DeAndre Carter for that 1 year, and all of a sudden, Carter seemed like a viable receiver for the first time in his career. It also doesn't hurt that Harbaugh is pretty familiar with him, having coached him at Michigan. That said, you have to hope he's there in the second round. Either way, it's risky, especially since his size might preclude him to become the star that the other guys up top might end up being, or most likely will be. With their 3rd round pick, I have the Chargers taking Trey Benson. I know it's a little high for a running back, considering they still have other needs like corner, but I do end up taking 2 corners, but stick around for that. But I found it way too hard to pass up a guy like Trey Benson, considering his bona fides. The guy ran a sub 4.4 at 216 pounds. He's a fast bruiser type that don't exactly grow on trees. So spending a high pick on someone like this just makes sense. And yes, this will make the running back room a little full, but with J.K. Dobbins, who knows if he's going to be ready to start the year and how effective he'll be. And I can see a guy like Isaiah Spiller with his practice habits getting cut during training camp. So a Trey Benson pick definitely looks good to me. With their first 4th round pick, I have the Chargers taking Michael Hall. He's by far the trendiest mid-round pick going in fake mock drafts. It makes sense considering he's an explosive prospect who just ran a 4.78 as pro day, which is pretty great for a defensive lineman. He's got a lot of pass rush upside, but he is undersized. He might also not be the best fit for what the Chargers defense is, but I think with a mid-round pick, and with as many picks as they have, it's worth taking a risk on a guy who could be a rotational player and be very effective when it comes to passing downs. With their second 4th round pick, I have the Chargers taking Jarrian Jones. Obviously, I would have liked to have gone after a corner a little earlier on, but it didn't work out that way in terms of the talent that was on the board. But I think he's a good fit for the Chargers. Jones struggled initially in his college career, but started doing a lot better once he got moved into the slot. And he's likely to perform a similar role in the NFL, and the Chargers do need some help in the slot, with Asante Samuel and Christian Fulton being the outside guys. Obviously, you'd probably rather an outside guy here who could compete with Fulton for the starting job, but at this point that's going to be hard to find. But considering where they are in the draft, I think he's a good pickup. With their 3rd and final 4th round pick, I have the Chargers taking Theo Johnson. I keep taking him for the Chargers, and for good reason. He's obviously a really great athlete, and I think his time at Penn State didn't really show everything he could do on the field. Couple that with the measurables that show that he'll probably be a good blocker at the next level. He just makes too much sense. Greg Roman has a pretty good track record too with tight ends, so really, if you want a guy who has a perfect RAS score with him, I think you got to do it. And yes, by adding Theo Johnson, it's going to be a pretty crowded room, but I think that makes sense because they're going to be doing a lot of 12 personnel. The Chargers room as it stands doesn't have any standouts, so who knows who gets cut before week 1. With their 5th round pick, I have the Chargers taking another corner in Cam Hart out of Notre Dame. Like I said earlier, it would have been ideal to get a corner who could play outside earlier, and Cam Hart's definitely a guy who can play outside, but he's definitely not ready to do it week 1. He's got great size at being over 6'2" and over 200 pounds, with solid speed and good hips. Under the right tutelage, you can definitely dream on him becoming something more than he is right now. And there's definitely a history of big corners who drop in the draft to end up developing into serious players in the NFL. So Cam Hart would definitely make sense as a project around this part of the draft. With their 6th round pick, I have the Chargers taking Michael Barrett. Barrett is a 6-year Wolverine, so he's kind of got limited upside. But at this part of the draft, you're looking at players who could help fill out a special teams role, or in his case, maybe have the upside of being a linebacker and dime. A guy like Steel Chambers out of Ohio State was still available, who was generally kind of considered a better prospect, but I like the Michael Barrett fit considering especially since he has familiarity with Harbaugh. With their first 7th round pick, I have the Chargers taking Justin Rogers. He's a defensive tackle out of Auburn, and I figured since I took a undersized one, I might as well take an oversized one this time around. At 330 pounds, he's definitely a nose tackle, and he's kind of limited athletically, and he doesn't have the best length, but he does like to fight people. I think this late in the draft, you're definitely looking for toughness, and he has no shortage for that. He probably will never be a star, but he could be a useful player. With their second 7th round pick, I have the Chargers taking Edefuan Ulofoshio. I did not pronounce that correctly. He's not exactly a highly touted prospect, and he's limited athletically, but again, when you're this late in the draft, you just want to add a guy who could help in special teams. And at least you know this guy, he's worked hard to get where he is, limited athletically, and he's probably not going to have a problem doing something like special teams. So I gotta say that despite the fact that I didn't get to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors or even Roman Dunze, I still like this draft. I think getting 2 cornerstones on the O-line, plus Roman Wilson and Trey Benson, is a really good mix. Almost as good of a mix as liking this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching. Make sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think of my draft, which PFF gave a B.